How'd you get into this racket?
Oh, geez. I wanted to make games since I was a child, since the first time I saw Space Invaders on a TV. The fact that you could manipulate an image on a TV just blew my mind. And I love film, I love comedy, things like that, but games are in my blood. And so at 11, I started programming on my Apple II. I made my first game, which was like a little adventure game. And then eventually, years later, I had an IBM PC, made a game when I was 17, 18 years old that basically made me enough money to eventually drop out of college and do this full time.
Really, at 17?
Yeah, I was living in Southern California at the time, and I basically got me enough money to get my first car, my first apartment, and kind of have a little bit of a nest egg to do this full time. And then the guy I made that game with, which was called Jazz Jackrabbit, I reunited with 20 plus years later to do my new studio.
What was the gag on Jazz Jackrabbit?
The idea was that it was a side-scrolling platform game like Sonic the Hedgehog,
Right.
And it was on the PC, and the PC didn't have any games like that at the time. It was all the rage on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Characters that like had guns and ran around on those games were really popular at the time, Crash Bandicoot, etc. I had this idea for a Rambo rabbit, and it was a little green rabbit with a gun, and it was the tortoise and the hare, but 3,000 years later, they're still fighting. So your enemies were all these turtles that were running around and everything, and we put out a demo for it, and the money started rolling in, and basically just hadn't looked back.
Tell me about Unreal Engine.
So Unreal Engine is my former employer's technology. It's licensed and powers many, many games throughout the business. It's basically part of my former employer's business model. They make great games, but they also make a great engine. Basically, it's kind of like a prefabricated setup that allows you to build a game and get past getting the pixels on screen and the polygons rendered. So you can just start making a game very, very quickly. We had stuff up and running within a month or two from our original licensing of the tech.
So you worked on Unreal Engine.
Yep.
And what did you do after that?
The game I'm most well known for this current generation is a series called Gears of War, which was pretty successful. It had spawned a trilogy and a fourth game that didn't do that well. That's neither here nor there. But basically, I retired for like a year and a half. Thought I would retire and not make video games anymore, and I just can only drink so many craft beers by the pool and reading sci-fi books. I got bored, and I was just like, the Notebook would come out again. And the ideas, and what would happen if you fired a high caliber rifle in zero gravity? You'd probably go backwards. What would happen if you fire it like this? You go forwards. Well, that's a move you can do in the game to propel yourself. And then if you shoot a rocket behind you and go flying forwards, and then you kill your enemy with that rocket, that's a YouTube moment. That's an animated GIF. For the first year, I took a salary of $1. And company culture is incredibly important to me too. We laugh, we go out for a pint, etc. We have a good time. I want to work at a studio for me culturally, where I know everyone's name and hopefully their spouse. And they can even bring their dog in and just keep it really a healthy working environment.
And what is your position there?
CEO.
Okay, so you're the big cheese.
Yeah, but I have a COO who's a rock star, who is the guy I made that Jazz Jackrabbit game with 20 years ago. He actually made Killzone, which is another big franchise. He was working to try and sell Sony consoles. I was working to try and sell Microsoft consoles. It was like Magneto and Professor X, and then we kind of reunited. And he basically does so much of the day-to-day, and he even codes and checks things in. He's not just like some sort of manager dude.
So you're actually doing the writing too?
Yeah. I basically no, I don't do any coding. I basically am like, hey, I want to see a purple gun that shoots lasers, and then okay, I want to see Los Angeles reformed after an earthquake where the oceans are boiling, and now the Santa Monica Pier has the new Ferris wheel, but it's defying gravity and spinning in all directions. Like that's the kind of stuff that makes it so I can't sleep at night.
And do you type that up, or you just tell people?
I type it up, but I also pitch in person. One thing about video games is that it's a very collaborative thing. It requires a team to do it, like a sport, right? I started the studio, I told people, this is going to be my baby to start. It's going to become the company's teenager and then the community's adult. And you need somebody saying, here are the 3 pillars of the game. What are the pillars? These are the pillars. You don't like it? There's the door. And once you have that initial kind of snowball form, you can start rolling it down the hill. And then one of the characters in the game I had nothing to do with, one of my programmers came up with, and it's one of the favorites for everyone. But you just need that kernel initially. If somebody's saying, like Ken Levine with BioShock, I want a robotic George Washington, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because that's how the crazy stuff gets made. It's like screenwriting. It's like, we like the script, but the monkey needs to go. It's like, the monkey's the best part. That's the same thing in creative. It's the same thing in Hollywood, in writing and everything. It's like, it's that weird thing that stands out that is the thing that they remember. For Gears, it was a chainsaw gun. It was a gun with a chainsaw on the bottom, which is the dumbest, most impractical thing you could ever imagine, because you'd cut your hand off. And I remember in the meeting, really? We're gonna have a chainsaw gun? I'm like, yes, I've wanted to see this since 2002. And that became an iconic thing. So that's kind of, you need somebody putting their foot down.
Chainsaw gun.
Yeah.
You need a chainsaw gun.
Yeah. I'll show you after.
I gotta see it.
It's pretty gnarly.
Why don't you walk us through from when you get the original idea, before you even get chainsaw gun.
Yep.
The original idea, I want a rabbit that's Rambo.
Yep.
And then right up until that gets played in someone else's home that you've never met.
One of the life lessons that I have is that every relationship, business, professional is unique, and every game is unique. It's like, people are like, how long does it take to build a game? It's like, how long does it take to build a house? Are we talking a one-bedroom ranch? Or are we talking, House of Versailles here? Like, what are we looking at? The way that I generally work is, I have an initial core of what I want to see. And for me, especially, it starts with verbs. And then I work outward as far as a world, an intellectual property that supports that. So for example, with the current game, I knew I wanted to play with variable gravity. In order to get that fiction-wise, I had to have a cataclysmic event that changed the world, and no one's really sure how or why this happened, but suddenly gravity manipulation becomes a thing due to a recently discovered element, due to advances in science and whatnot. The moon winds up exploding due to a certain incident that I'm not revealing yet. That causes an earthquake on Earth. Earth rebuilds 25, 30 years later, oceans are boiling, and now we have LA reimagined the way I think LA should be, with green walkable spaces instead of miles of traffic, with Frank Gehry architecture everywhere, and I can really depict that world. I can take the Grand Canyon, sold off because the government gets broke, and it's bought by a shell corporation for Japanese Yakuza, and then turned into a Yakuza base. So for me, I have the core of the verbs, and then I kind of come up with the pitch, which is usually like the one-pager. And basically, if you can't pitch your game in like a tweet, you're maybe overthinking it a little bit. Minecraft is Lego with crafting. Right? For this one, it's, two sides going against each other, guns, variable gravity. And that's the way I pitch it: gangs, guns, and gravity. And so it's funny because, once you have that pitch, you need to sell people on it, and then you get concept art done up. Is this what you're thinking for this character? Is this what you're thinking for this weapon? At the same time, people are doing what we call gray box prototyping, where they just do, without even worrying about the art, they just bare bones art it, get a version of a gun in or a version of a move or something, and then once that works, it's kind of like a straw man, then we code it up proper and see if it works. And every day we're in the test lab playing the game. It's an old saying called making people eat their own dog food, where if something's broken, I'm in the test lab going, what happened to the blood? When I shoot this giant character, blood should come off, and the programmer's like, all right, I'll go fix it. And at least twice a day if the build isn't broken, because that's game dev and builds can break. Play the whole game and basically lather, rinse, repeat as you're kind of forming the sculpture. In this day and age, the best way, in my opinion, to release a game is to have early access so people can see if your stuff's broken or even if it's fun, and then put it out to 5,000 people, and then put it out to 50,000. Then put it out to 200 and scale upwards. That instead of what's happened in the last couple of years is a lot of games come out, sell 10 million copies day one, the servers can't keep up. You could have 1,000 testers play your game. They're not going to find the bugs that 10 million people are going to find. It's just a matter of physics. And do a slow burn, slow release, and hopefully have a game that goes on for years now, because we're in a world where games have to be kind of a constant service where you're constantly feeding new characters, new weapons, new settings into it. And it becomes a platform where people don't just play multiple games. They're like, I play League of Legends, that's all I play. Or, hopefully they'll say I play Lawbreakers if we do our job right. So that's an incredibly complex concept to kind of try to fumble through and explain in like a tweet.